3, 2, 1.
How about we do it again?
6, 7, 4, 3, 2, 1. I think I farted.
Okay, let's try one more
I
time.
definitely
Ready?
I can move you. Making review. Making review.
Say 6,
6,
5,
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to episode 106 of Rank and Review. This is the first of a two-part episode where my guest Lee Beckmann and I will be counting down the top 25 horror movies from the 1970s. I wanted to educate myself on that decade as there was a lot of blind spots there. So in this first half we're going to be reviewing three films that one of those three I was very familiar with, but two of them I weren't. So this episode we're going to review The Town That Dreaded Sundown, The Wicker Man, and Taxi Driver. And we're going to rank from the 25th to the 13th of the best horror movies of the 1970s. As usual, this is your host and random Canadian Larry Parsons, and as usual, expect coarse language and expect spoilers for some of the movies discussed. I hope you enjoy this episode of Rank and Review, and please tell a friend. Send your feedback to ranknreview@gmail.com. Tell me what your favorite movies of the 70s were. Tell me what I missed. Without further ado, enjoy the 106th episode of Rank and Review. Hello and welcome, Rank and Reviewers, to another very special edition of Rank and Review with current champion Mr. Lee Beckmann, or as you want it to be referred to, the Beckmann.
Yes.
The Beckmann.
I'm the article of the, and then...
You just want to go by Beckmann, sort of like Madonna or Cher. Beckmann.
No. And when you're this big, you gotta have the. Okay.
The Beckmann is here.
Yeah.
Once upon a time, a little over a year ago, I guess.
It's been longer than that.
It's been a year and change anyway. We did, there are 25 best horror movies of the 80s.
Yes.
And here we sit today to talk about the 25 best horror movies of the 70s.
Yes.
And I just want to, full confession here.
Okay.
I was born in 1976,
Yes.
halfway through this decade.
As was I.
And I am less familiar with the 70s than I am with the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I did a lot of watching of 70s horror movies in the last few months.
Yeah.
And as diligent as I tried to be, there are things that I have missed. So... I'm just going to name a few titles here that are not going to win place or show because I haven't seen them.
Okay.
Alice, Sweet Alice.
Okay.
Let's Scare Jessica to Death.
Yep.
I've been trying to get my hands on that. I haven't been able to.
Yeah.
I did not make it. I started Incident at Hanging Rock, but I didn't finish it, so I'm not going to
I've not seen
include
that
it
either.
here. The Reincarnation of Peter Proud. I was trying to find that. I couldn't get my hands to it. I didn't see it in time. Those are the ones that immediately come to mind that I was actually looking out for.
Yeah.
And through the list, I may mention a couple of adjacent movies that aren't on the list, but that are of interest to me that I just want to flag for people who are in there. But I hope to get feedback on this because I would love it if I was introduced to another batch of more great 70s horror movies.
Yeah.
Oh, the other big blind alley for me is the Hammer Studios.
Yeah,
The British Hammer horror movies, Blood of Dracula, Horror of Frankenstein, all of those ones.
Yeah.
I might have seen them when I was young, but not to the point that I would feel comfortable
There's
talking
so
about.
many actually really good genre horror movies in this decade. It's an embarrassment of riches.
It was a tough list to make.
Oh my god.
It's a tough list to make.
And even now I'm looking at it kind of going...
This is the thing Beckmann and I were discussing right before we hit record. What are the things that we're gonna miss? What's the we'll have stuff on each other's list that's gonna piss each other off, right?
Yeah.
I'm weirdly selfish about 70s horror because I'm backtracking and I'm looking back into it because obviously I was 1 to 4 when a lot of these movies came out for me.
Yeah.
But I recently had a conversation with someone who will remain nameless, who referred to The Exorcist as old and slow.
See, we're going to find this person and slap this person silly.
So, as much as I am guilty of being, much more focused on movies of my own age and time, and every decade you go back, I've seen fewer films, right?
Yeah.
The 60s, I've seen a fair amount of 60s movies, but not a ton.
Yeah.
50s, fewer still.
Yeah.
40s, fewer still. 30s, like maybe a couple.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
yeah.
So we're kind of starting for where I am really conscious of cinema in the 70s, and there is a bit of a learning gap here. So please send us feedback on anything we missed. I just wanted to put that little sort of
there are so many movies that didn't make the list that I'm kind of going, oh my god, really, like Werner Herzog's Nosferatu is not on my list,
right?
And that kind of, I can't believe I'm saying that. The Stepford Wives, I think, is a pretty terrifying story. That's not on this list.
Yeah, it's not on my list either.
Neither is Eraserhead.
Right.
So, like these are movies that I think are very chilling, very disturbing. The Longest Day, I think it's called, that Australian one.
Right.
Or is it The Longest Weekend? I can't remember. It's about that couple that get lost in nature, and nature essentially
gets back at them.
A weekend from hell.
Right.
That's not on this list. It's really hard.
I agree with you as far as the embarrassment of riches, but I
Yeah.
also raise you because the 70s was such a strong era for film, generally speaking.
Yeah.
I think that they understood spectacle, they understood pageantry, but they hadn't really got into the psychology of filmmaking as deeply until you got into the 70s.
Okay.
And that's why there are some psychological thrillers on the list. We're going to actually review Taxi Driver.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't consider that a horror movie, but
Yeah.
I've always thought of it as a horror movie.
Yes.
And I watched the documentary on the 25th anniversary or whatever edition DVD,
Yeah.
and Scorsese himself refers to it as a horror movie. So
Oh, yeah,
my position feels vindicated in that way.
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities or themes they're exploring in 70s horror that is wonderfully intelligent to look at.
And just the psychological dimension to film made films that were structured as a thriller, which you could argue maybe Taxi Driver was, feel terrifying and visceral and real in a way that they hadn't.
Yeah.
So there's a few items on my list that people might say, is that an According to Hoyle?
No, there's a couple. Yeah, I've got a couple of those.
But we'll see. Again, it's tough. Like, I have this feeling like someday I'm going to get into Hammer horror, and then I'm going to feel the need to revise this whole list, right? Yeah. Or, there's these odd ones out that someone's going to give me an email and say, oh, you haven't seen blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Like, oh.
But I'm confident with my list right now as far as movies that I have personally seen from the 70s. Yeah. That doesn't mean this is the definitive best of 70s list, but I think it'll be worth, filling your ears with.
Yeah. No, one thing I want to talk about before we sort of send it off is just sort of the themes and also sort of the images being explored in this time. Like I said, it was a very experimental time of filmmaking that I don't think America will see in quite some time right now.
There seems to be peaks and valleys of it, right? Mm-hmm. But this is the 70s with the era of big budget movies that felt like independent movies.
This is the beginning of the Hollywood blockbuster, summer blockbuster.
Yeah. Well, Jaws sort of signified that in, but at the time, they were making pretty experimental mainstream movies.
Yeah.
That went away largely for the 80s, came back a little bit in the early 90s.
Yeah.
And then the pendulum has swung back to the spectacle, to the Transformers, to the, crowd pleasers, right?
Yep.
That's just the age that we're in.
They were also very obsessed with psychics and the sort of supernatural.
And psychiatrists.
And psychiatrists as well. I mean, yes, pathology was being deeply explored at this point as well. But they sure seem to be, obsessed with that. But the films itself almost have a dreamlike quality because there was also the examination of, what do the dreams mean and all that other things. So there's a lot of movies that have, even like the aesthetic of it, it's very hazy and hypnotic and dreamlike. And that's something that for most of these movies, it's really, really consistent.
At the risk of sounding old at the age of 42, a lot of these movies require what the youngins these days don't seem to have, which is patience.
And attention,
Yeah. Like, there's a lot of movies that will sort of let you sort of seep into the atmosphere of the movie and just sort of let it sort of envelop you slowly, and it will take a good half an hour, 45 minutes to really start to cook.
Yeah.
And this YouTube generation, would find it old and boring, and that's so heartbreaking to me.
No, see, this person just needs no, but we won't go there.
But it's interesting you talk about the psychological bend to it. I absolutely agree with that. In fact, in most of the movies that we're actually going to review, there's some sort of psychological layer to the movie.
Yeah.
I guess we can mention the movies we are going to review. We're going to talk about Brian De Palma's Carrie.
Yes.
We're going to talk about Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver.
Yes.
We're going to talk about one of British's first true cult horror successes, The Wicker Man.
Yep.
We're going to talk about a fascinating adaptation of a William Goldman novel called Magic.
Yep.
We're going to look at cult figure of a film. I guess this is one like I hadn't seen yet, and I thought, Lee, let's talk about this movie because it deserves watching. So, The Town That Dreaded Sundown, and I would like to take this moment to apologize for making you watch The Town That Dreaded Sundown. And of course, for a little bit of Canadian content, we're going to talk about David Cronenberg. And The Brood.
Such a good movie.
So we have like a lot of psychological stuff and a lot of different stuff to talk about in the reviews. But is there anything you want to say before we dick in? No, before we duck into this particular project?
And yet that homosexual undertone just comes creeping right in. Yes. Okay. No, I think we've already said too much.
Okay.
And we've been talking for way too long, so let's start this right.
Do it.
Jenkins, age 19. Brutally attacked March 3rd, 1946. Howard W. Turner, 29. Emmylou Cook, 17. Bodies discovered in a wooded area on March 24th. Roy Allen, 17. Peggy Loomis, 15. Both found dead April 14th in Spring Lake Park. Floyd Reed, age 34. Murdered in his home on May 3rd. Mrs. Reed shot twice, but survived. This man's identity is unknown. He was believed to be between 30 and 40 years old. He wore a white hood and was known only as the Phantom Killer. World War II had just ended. In Texarkana, Arkansas, boys had come home to their families. Husbands reunited with their wives. It was a happy, peaceful time. Until the Phantom Killer struck. For 4 months, he held an entire city in the icy grip of terror. Now, Charles B. Pierce brings this incredible, shocking, and true story to the screen in The Town That Dreaded Sundown.
I'm sorry, Beckmann.
Yeah, alrighty.
Part of doing this 70s list was that I wanted to watch a bunch of 70s movies that I hadn't seen. So I know I couldn't get enough done to be completely informed, but I wanted to be better informed than I was. And there was a recent remake of this film, The Town That Dreaded Sundown.
Which is so much better than...
Yeah, well, I mean, I wasn't 100% on board. Like, the script is a little bit wonky for me. But as far as technical execution, I thought it was a really well-made slasher movie. So it made me curious about the original. So here we are talking about 70s horror movies. And we kept on reshuffling and redeciding what we were going to review, and I was being a pain in the ass about it, like I sometimes can be. And I decided, we're going to do The Town That Dreaded Sundown, because I haven't seen it. And I wish I'd done a little bit of more research and due diligence before I made that call. Charles B. Pierce is the director of this movie.
He did
in
that.
In 1972, he did The Legend of Boggy Creek, which is another movie I reviewed not very favorably on the podcast. And knowing that he's the same guy who directed Boggy Creek makes a lot of things make sense about this movie. The fact that it doesn't really know if it's a narrative film or a faux documentary.
Docudrama, I think is the term
the fact that most of the cast seem to be friends of his as opposed to legitimate actors. The fact that it takes local legend and lore, or in this case a series of killings by either one hooded man or several hooded men that did occur in the Texas-Arcana areas. So he's taken all the different stories that have sort of come from that incident, much the way he did with all the stories about the creature from Boggy Creek, and he has slapped together a very, very amateurish film about it. You know, what works for the movie occasionally, I think, and I've said similar things about Boggy Creeks, are the accidental spookiness of just retelling true events. the image of that hooded man reminds me of, you know, Friday the 13th Part 2,
Yeah.
or like a Klan member,
Yeah.
or some scary fucking, you know, redneck
Yeah.
dude.
Yeah.
That image is always going to be strong.
Yeah.
And on the backdrop of the Zodiac killings, which were still,
Yeah.
you know, very, very much in the public consciousness at this
Yeah.
time, there's a little bit of an exploitative angle to it.
Yeah.
But
Well, the
between-
first killing actually I thought was kind of similar to the opening killing in the Zodiac. It's, you know, a hooded killer looking very similar.
Yeah.
Walks up to a sort of couple making out and proceeds to stalk and eventually, well, damage if not kill them.
Well, my opening salvo of criticism is in the 4 years between The Legend of Boggy Creek
Yeah.
and 1976, this one, The Town That Raided Sundown. I feel like the director has not improved in any way.
His instincts, when they're wrong, they're just so horribly wrong. When he's focusing on the story of the killer, when we see the killer himself and the attention to certain detail, I mean, he's played fast and loose with other facts. I think the movie works as a slasher. It's
Right.
it's one of the first, you know, it made money. I'll just say that.
Well, this was his bread and butter, and he's got
Yeah.
all these like cult films. Boggy Creek is a successful movie. This
Yeah.
is a successful movie.
Yeah.
It's got a 6.1 out of 10 rating on IMDb, and
Yeah.
I find that IMDb users tend to be really hard on horror movies.
Yeah.
And I really honestly have a hard time seeing where the love is coming from. We were talking about how most of these movies we're talking about, and a lot of movies in the 70s, have psychological depth. Mm-hmm. This has none of that.
No, but the story structure, I think, this might have been one of those first. I don't know about docudramas, obviously. Not even, I wouldn't say that, but it does get meta, where the killer, not only, you know, we only see his boots, but at the very end is in line to see his very own movie.
Yeah.
Which is sort of, you know, he's still out there because they didn't actually catch the killer.
And is it a docudrama or is it a straight movie?
Well,
because the movie keeps jumping the reel. And
yeah.
Yeah.
And that's where I think some of the poor choices came. If you're going to hire any recognizable actors that are clearly actors for something like this, that wall is broken because you know it is fiction. Ben Johnson is the most, sort of, well, he's from the Wild Bunch. Visible name at the time. He was a somewhat box office draw, but even that guy who's in V, what's his name? Andrew Pine. This is one of his first big movies. You know, at that point was known as, you know, a great stage actor. So
Actors gotta eat. I get it.
I get it, but it's one thing that actually hurts the movie. These should have gotten not recognizable actors. So I think that was the one wrong move there. But I got to tell you, when they do the whole Keystone Cop, no, it's just no. This movie is a hard, dark, horrific story. Don't add any sort of, not even like, I wouldn't say comedic elements, but like just screwball comedic elements.
Charles B. Pierce, the director, cast himself as Patrolman Benson.
Yeah.
The yokel idiot comic relief thing.
Yeah.
So not only was it a bad call, it was completely driven by the creator of this film, right? Like, okay, we've got some pretty high suspense, and we're basing this movie off of authentic murders that happened in. But while we're at it, let's throw some Dukes of Hazzard's humor into this fucking thing.
Yeah.
No. You and I talked about Last House on the Left, the old Wes Craven movie, doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Like where I think Craven thought it was so hard, the violence and the rapey stuff, that he needed to counterbalance it with some goofy.
No.
And the goofy becomes so much more vulgar.
Yeah.
Because it's juxtaposed with it. It makes you feel like you shouldn't take it seriously.
Yeah.
And if it's based on true events, maybe you should take it a little bit seriously.
Yeah. No, I just go dark. Be nihilistic in your darkness and nastiness. No.
And it didn't leave me with that feeling like, oh, the killer's still out there, I should be afraid.
Yeah.
It just left me grateful that the fucking movie was over.
I gotta give credit where credit is due. It has one of the most ridiculous kills I've ever seen in a movie.
Trombone?
And they changed it. I mean, in the original story, when it really happened, this woman actually got sexually assaulted by her saxophone that she used. They're coming from a concert.
Oh, Jesus.
So they decided to change that, obviously. As sort of
Did it need
trombone.
to be there at all, though?
Who knows? Anyways,
The woman was assaulted by a musical instrument. How can we exploit this for cinema?
Yeah, well,
fuck off. Either do a straight take on what happened.
Yeah.
Or make an honest...
But could they show a woman getting actually violated by a saxophone?
Well, you wouldn't want to show it, right?
So, yeah.
But if you're doing like what happened, you could, she was a musician and, he follows
beaten
her
to
to
death,
her house.
yeah.
And, like, you don't have to get necessarily into the specifics.
But
or if you are, you can do it like they did the Zodiac film and
Yeah.
just be as factual as the facts available will
Yeah.
allow them to.
But I've never seen Death by Trombone.
No.
As ridiculous as it is, and it's...
But should we see Death by Trombone?
I don't know.
That was one of the scenes that didn't sit well with me in the remake.
Remake.
And then at least when I saw the original, I guess, like, okay, well, I guess it was a scene that they felt they needed to include.
What's a famous kill? Some internet nerds cite that as one of the best cinematic horrific kills.
It's just another thing that breaks the tone. Like, this should be frightening, or it should be, like, a fascinating procedural.
It's bizarre.
Of, like, what
it's
happened.
bizarre.
But in the wrong ways. It just seems distasteful to me.
Yeah.
At least with Boggy Creek, you're dealing with essentially an urban legend and a fairy tale.
Yeah.
In this case, you're dealing with 5 people were murdered.
Yep.
Real people were murdered.
Yep.
And this is the movie that's going to, quote, tell their story.
Yeah. To me, though, the most horrific elements, and like I said, when this movie focuses on the actual hunt, both with the killer doing his hunts and Ben Johnson, actually physically hunting this person, I think it works. That sequence where this is all for the Gilligan Island fans out there, Marianne, Dawn Wells, and then in real life the person did survive as well, is like hunted and butchered. She really is butchered, but somehow makes it out and is alive. That whole sequence to me is pretty terrifying. I got to give that props there. But it is one of those few and far between.
It felt like the movie had already shot the bed for me by that point.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I
was like really off-put by the movie quickly.
Yeah, I agree.
And it doesn't, aside from not having any clear tone or clear narrative or, standout performances, doesn't even really have an ending. And I guess they were
Well, it's very sudden.
Yeah, they're kind of boxed in because, the Phantom Killer was never caught.
Yeah.
They didn't even know if it was one guy or a couple of guys.
Yeah.
Like, they just don't know anything about
the cops, the movie ends with the cops sort of, definitely with their hat in their hands and kind of going, huh, what? And then it cuts to this long tracking shot of all these feet, and then it focuses on the killer's feet, and you hear that breathing again. And then it pans up to, the town that read Sundown on their marquee. Yeah. So, yeah, there are elements that work. I don't want to totally dismiss the film, but all in all, it doesn't work. The execution of it just falls so hard.
Usually with cult classics or, quote, classic horror movies, when I find them, I don't always like them, but there'll be a scene or a performance or a moment that makes me go, this is what people talk about. This is the thing that makes this movie a point of interest. Yeah. And I honestly, I would encourage people to not watch this movie. Like, for me, it's a miss.
Okay. I agree it's a mess.
If you're going to watch one movie that this guy did, I'd say watch Boggy Creek.
Okay.
It's got like a Disney educational film kind of amusing quality to it. And the fact that it's based on a Bigfoot creature makes it a little bit easier to digest, I think. Yeah. But all of the decisions made in this movie is wrong. And again, he really hit something with Boggy Creek, this almost documentary feel where he collected the stories of the community and just put them in a movie very sloppily. Yeah. He's doing the same thing 4 years later, much worse. Okay. Well, I agree. This movie's not good, and some of the choices made by him are just such the wrong choice. I do think when the killer is on the hunt, it's got some raw power and pathos. But I agree about that hood, right? Yeah, but I do agree that everything else, almost everything else, is like nails on a chalkboard, kind of. And the opportunity to make something scary was everywhere in this movie. Yeah, the fact the story itself is based horrifying. On a true events is Texarkana, 1945. Yeah. And, or the paranoia. 46, my bad, yeah. The paranoia that it would instill in the community, right? Yeah. Some guy in a hood is randomly killing folk. And you got a heavily armed and paranoid community. And that can breed badness. There's all sorts of opportunities. None of them are one way I thought this film could have worked, because when they focus on the community and how they're terrorized,
by the fact that this person is out there. I thought it would be a really terrifying way to tell this story, is that it follows one of the victims. I think that even the woman who survives it in the house, her story is terrifying, and how, at night she's listening to the radio and hearing about all these things, and you can focus on her relationship, and especially with her community, and the last act where it ends with her being hunted, and you don't know whether she survives. I thought that would be a cool way to tell this story, because that right there is the true fear.
Everything with the kitchen sink was thrown into this.
Yeah.
And I think he got really lucky with Legend of Boggy Creek.
Okay.
He was just able to keep on making movies.
Yeah.
And that's fine. More power to you, but you got to change your game. You got to improve. You got to,
Were there any sort of other docudramas like this, though? I mean, that's the other thing where I think
there were things that emulated Boggy Creek, but I think Boggy Creek was sort of bedrock for that.
For that horror docudrama. I think that might be one of the reasons why this film still is in the sort of cinematic lexicon. People still remember it. I think that might have been one of those first that way.
Yeah.
But no, the overall execution is just.
Going back to what I said about Wicker Man, as far as there's some stuff you got to get over.
Yeah.
There's definitely stuff you got to get over, but unlike Wicker Man, I think that Wicker Man provides you a really good payoff that makes the fighting through the sludge kind of worth it.
Yeah.
Whereas it's not worth fighting through this one. I don't think so.
Yeah.
And I hate to be that mean about it, but once again, I am sorry that I made you watch this.
You are forgiven.
Out of 25 movies from the 1970s,
Here we go.
what was it's not your least favorite, but what ranked number 25 on your list?
Well, starting way at number 25, I have Donald Cammell's film adaptation of Dean Koontz's The Demon, well, actually just Demon Seed, there's no but Demon Seed.
Okay.
It's one of those films where time has not been overly kind to it, but the ideas presented in it are more terrifying, and it also has a really, really amazing performance from Julie Christie, who it's kind of like The Entity in a lot of ways, where this woman is trapped in an unbelievably awful existence, and she can't leave the house, and she's trapped in it. There's something very terrifying about having your home invaded.
Right.
There's something scary about it, and it's sort of, it's betraying you in a lot of ways. The fact, the ending is also quite shocking. I'm not going to spoil it for you listeners, but the ending is quite shocking, and it's in need of a reboot because the technology of it, or the props of it, they're very dated,
right?
And it kind of hurts the power of the scene. But once again, it's the idea of it that's just. So, hats off to Demon Seed.
Very good. Again, that's one of those movies that I've seen, but I only had a vague memory of.
Yeah.
So it didn't make my list.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it would have made the list either way. I guess who's to say? That's one of the fascinating things about revisiting films so many years on. Sometimes your opinion completely changes on it. My number 25, and I think you'll find a lot in the bottom, the 21 to 25, are ones a little bit of either a gray area for me, because I don't know if it's an according to Hoyle horror movie, or because it deserves recognition, whether or not my feelings of it really match. But at the bottom, I'm putting a sort of tie. It's two animated films adapting Douglas Adams' work, Watership Down and The Plague Dogs. Okay. These are two animated films about animals being put through absolutely brutal torment. And let's pretend you're a little boy who grew up in small town Alberta named Larry, and your parents give you a copy of Watership Down to watch because they figure it's an animated movie about rabbits. And let's say that in this movie there's a psychic rabbit that foretells the destruction of the Warrens. And let's say in this movie there are rabbits that tear the throats out of other rabbits. And let's say in this movie that there is ridiculous bloodletting and an overall theme of doom and duty and, facing everything up to and including death itself. There's a black ghostly rabbit that will lead one of our heroes to the other side at the end of this movie.
Yeah.
It is not for kids. Now, is it a horror movie? Well, I don't know if you could honestly say it's a horror movie, but it was fucking horrifying to me. Yeah. He made a follow-up, The Plague Dog, which is less recognized, similar style of animation. And in this movie, it's animated, but they put dogs in vats of water and have them swim laps until they drown.
Damn.
Resuscitate them, then throw them back to swim laps in the vat until they drown. That's the opening of The Plague Dogs.
Happy right? Times, yeah.
So you see what I'm saying? Like, this is personal to me. Maybe this is like the Road Warrior pick from the 80s, but
there's a couple strange picks on here that
I just found those movies really upsetting and horrifying, and I felt the need to mention them on my list. So that's my 25.
Yeah. All right. So at number 24, and this film's more for, I guess, how important it was in history. But at number 24. I have Blackula.
Oh, nice.
And you do a whole what? Here's my argument for Blackula. Not only is it like, this film's a lot of fun. It is a hoot. I don't think you won't find it scary, but it knows what it is. A lot of sort of disco music. It's an exploitation film. But have you heard of the Saturn Awards?
The Saturn Awards, yeah.
Yes. Well, if you look at the history of the Saturn Awards, the very first time they had the awards that the top horror film of the year was, wait for it, Blackula. Yes, that's true. This is the very first film to win Best Horror, and this is the year before The Exorcist came out. Blackula won Best Horror Film, so I'm just saying that for more historical context. But also, Blackula also started a subgenre of what's called black horror films. This is like the beginning of it. There's a long history of it, from like Blackenstein, Ganja and Hess.
Some are good, some are fun, some are boring, but for what it's worth, it established its own genre.
Yes. So this is the beginning of it, and a lot, Tales from the Hood.
Yeah.
And of course, all the way to like this year's and very, very, very good horror film. I know it's not the 70s, but even Get Out owes a big, huge debt to Blackula. The film is a lot of fun. It's very funny, and got a couple of chills.
Yeah, that's my memory of it. I remember thinking it was sort of silly and fun.
Yeah, so it is. It's actually a lot of fun, and it also respects its ghouls. Like, it does treat them sort of well. And there is one sort of I found kind of chilling scene where one of the women that has been bitten by Prince Mamawande, I think is his African name, but Blackula has now been turned into. She's left at the morgue, taken out of the freezer, and dethaws. And of course comes back as this raging vampire, and she at this chilling scene where she wakes up and her eyes are just huge and her face is white, and she's running down this hallway and just bites into the morgue, the coroner who's just gotten off the phone with our hero detective, if you will. I thought, damn, that is kind of creepy. So I put here number 24, Blackula. It's a lot of fun. Not the most politically correct of movies, but they once again of its time.
Right.
But also the actor who plays Blackula, whose name escapes me.
I don't know it, but we can find it.
I have it here. He's got such a presence. What's his name? William Marshall. That's who it was.
William Marshall.
I don't know. There's something about him that he's just very luring, a lot of fun. So Blackula, folks.
All right, 24, another possibly controversial pick, but on both sides. There are people that say this should be higher on the list, and there are people that say this shouldn't be here at all. You can find it as either Zombie or Zombie 2. Okay? It's a Mario Bava zombie picture, Italian thing, and it's most famous for a scene in which a zombie and a shark do battle.
Yeah.
And it is really, really worth seeing for that scene.
Yeah.
And there's some pretty good meaty, Italian violence type of scenes. Yeah. And there's a lot of exploitative nudity. And if you're into that sort of thing, I mean, it's got all of that.
Yeah.
For me, I don't know that I think it's a good movie, but I think it's a movie that, as a zombie horror fan, you kind of owe yourself to at least give a pass on.
Okay.
Some people really, really do love it. I also just wanted to mention peripherally to this, the reason it's either Zombie or Zombie 2.
Yeah.
Zombie is actually a Dario Argento recut of Dawn of the Dead.
Yeah.
So in overseas markets, this is Zombie 2, and in this side of the ocean, it's just Zombie.
Okay.
But if you can get your hands on the Argento cut of Dawn of the Dead, that is also worth a look, because he just took all the raw footage and cut his own movie out of it. There are scenes in there that aren't in Dawn of the Dead. There are alternate takes of different angles of scenes that you've seen in Dawn of the Dead, and it's a much more sort of thinned out, quicker version of Dawn of the Dead. It's like 100 minutes instead of 125. Yeah. So that's worth a look. But in 24th position, Zombie 2. Mainly for zombie versus shark.
Okay. So at number 23, I have the very strange and odd and still hypnotic British horror film, The Wicker Man. When it first started, I didn't know I was going to like this movie nor find it creepy. But then I'd say no, even after the first arc of the story has been told, something just sort of switches. And there's just this underlying dread all the way building up to the shocking final. I don't want to say anything more because obviously we're going to talk about this more deeper.
Yeah, we're going to review it.
But at number 23, I have The Equalizer's starring role, The Wicker Man.
At 23, I have the only Dario Argento film, which will be included on this list.
Yeah.
And again, it's another one of these important horror movies. I recognize that it's beautiful, but I've never found it particularly frightening. I just think it's kind of pretty and arty. But if you're into art house horror, Suspiria is like the crown jewel of it. I have been on record on the podcast as saying that I'm not the hugest Argento follower. Like, I appreciate him getting Dawn of the Dead made. I like his cut of Dawn of the Dead, and I like, his contribution to the horror genre. But if Suspiria is his best work, I'm not boiling over with enthusiasm, but I recognize it as an important work of 70s horror. So here it sits at 23.
Okay, at number 22, I have the first of a couple giallo horror movies. The film that you talked about is on this list, but the first off, and it's a little. This is one of the two movies that if you don't know about it, and you have to seek it out a little bit to find it. YouTube has it, but if you do get a copy of it, no one really knows this movie, and it's called the Italian horror movie, The House with the Laughing Windows. The story itself is also just kind of chilling and terrifying. Basically, what it is that this art restorator is sent to this town to go and basically clean up and fix this fresco painting. And there's this artist who used to do all these paintings. You did these immaculate scenes of torture and murder, like they were just hauntingly realistic. And no one knew how he's getting these amazing images until finally, and this is in the past, the town figures out that this painter and his, I think, two sisters were killing all these people, and he was painting them. So of course something happened to him one night, and he just disappeared.
Sounds sort of reminiscent of H.P. Lovecraft's Pickman's model.
Yeah. Anyways, and just the opening minutes of it is just basically the sound of it's just terrifying. Where they're showing shots of this fresco that this art restorator is going to fix along the way, and as he does, he discovers more about the mystery of what happened that night to these to that artist and two sisters, because they just disappeared. And soon realizes, and there's this twist ending in it that is just what.
I've never seen it, so I can't speak to it.
Anyways, the opening minutes it is shots of this fresco and the sound of the murder that both the sisters and this painter are doing, and it's very well done. And the sound of it is just, it stays with you. Like, it does burn into your memory quite a bit, and then it kind of goes all the way to that twist sort of ending that I honestly didn't see coming. So that was also very refreshing. It kind of lulls a little bit in the middle, like a lot of sort of giallo films where it has usually this kind of lull a bit, but it just also has that aesthetic that is just hypnotic and nightmarish. So check out The House with the Laughing Windows.
There's something about the dubbing and the color of those movies.
Yeah.
It's something that got in my head at a young age. And again, part of this is me watching these when I was too young.
Mm-hmm.
But there's something that just always felt artificial about Giallo, between the fact that their lips didn't match their words, that the colors were so loud, that everything, I don't know. I don't have a lot of Italian cinema on my list, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
In 22nd position, and this will surprise you, but I don't think you could deny the visceral effect, the visceral horrifying effect of David Lynch's Eraserhead.
Yeah. That's not on my list, but yeah, it's...
I mean, I guess I just gave the crown jewel of art house horror to Suspiria, but I guess Eraserhead would have to be in that discussion. Mm-hmm. This story of this strange, ghoulish man who wants to become a father and ends up parenting this thing, and this creepy as fuck dancing girl inside his radio, and just all of this unrelated, horrifying imagery. I mean, I've said a lot of mean things about David Lynch, but I mean, I will give him this. He's the real deal. I don't think he's a poser. I think that, he takes his art pretty seriously. And it's hard to deny that Eraserhead doesn't have some moments that just stick with you. Yeah. Like, it's almost a traumatizing film. Does that make it good? I don't know, but it certainly makes it memorable. So, yes, at 22nd position, I will put David Lynch's batshit crazy. Like, I can't underserve how crazy it is. Yeah. Eraserhead.
Okay. Well, at number 21, a film that you could argue is not a horror film, but at the same time, I think is very much a terrifying film. About a trip that goes horribly, horribly wrong. And that is John Boorman's classic Deliverance. Mm-hmm. This is a trip through hell where masculinity is ripped and destroyed bare. And, I don't know. I don't want to see too much. I think we could review this movie. And that is and also Burt Reynolds is the fucking bomb in this movie. But there's this
one
scene,
of the few movies where Burt Reynolds lives up to his reputation, as far as I'm concerned. He was a huge superstar who's made like 4 good movies in his fucking career. Okay, that's maybe unfair because I haven't seen every one of his movies, but most of the Burt Reynolds joints I've seen have been terrible, which is why Deliverance is actually, and how good he himself is in it. No, that's a solid choice. In 21st position, I have a tie. Okay. And I want to talk a little bit about my love of Richard Matheson. Okay. I came late to the game to Richard Matheson as far as like reading some of his short fiction and his novels. And I've always been a big fan of Stir of Echoes, that Kevin Bacon ghost movie, which is based off one of his novels. So I want to give a little shout out to 2 movies: The Haunting of Hell House, and Steven Spielberg's first motion picture.
Yep. See, it's on my list. Okay, I've got it higher.
They're both adaptations of Richard Matheson, and they both have sort of good and bad qualities. Yeah. They're so very 70s that they fit snugly on this list. Like, if you want to know what the feel of a 70s movie is, the weird experimental close-ups in Hell House and canted angles are really good. Also, I got to give points to Hell House and its efficiency. In an age where horror movies would take 45 minutes to get started, you're in Hell House's front door by the end of the opening credits. Like, they move in that movie. So yes, Hell House and Duel, The Legend of Hell House and Duel, and I just want to give a little shout out to a made-for-television movie called Trilogy of Terror. Okay. I couldn't honestly include it on the list because the first 2 stories are kind of snooze-inducing, but the third story, where Karen Black gets this Aztec voodoo doll thing that comes alive and chases her around her apartment, is fucked. Seek it out on YouTube. It's not an easy thing to get your hands on, but it's called Trilogy of Terror. And you can watch like the last half an hour and just skip the rest if you want. But for my 21, The Legend of Hell House shares the spot with Steven Spielberg's Duel. Okay, at number 20, I have the batshit crazy Phantasm, Don Coscarelli's Phantasm. I think this film is actually a lot smarter than people give it credit for. I've only seen the first 2, but I understand there's a whole story arc that goes all the way up to they just ended it recently with Ravager. Some of the special effects hurt the movie. I mean, it is really campy what they're going for, but there's some pretty terrifying elements to it. It's just
I'm just happy this film exists.
Yeah.
It is Phantasm.
Yeah, that's a solid choice. It appears on my list. It actually surprised me how high it managed to creep on my list. But in 20th position for me is another movie that we're going to talk about. It's called Magic. And it was one of those movies that I've wanted to see forever, and I finally, did.
Yeah.
And I love it. Like,
yeah, it's good.
I've got a hard copy on its way to me in the mail.
Yeah.
And, I don't want to get too much into it because we are going to review it, but Anthony Hopkins, man.
So good in it.
Is
Fantastic. This is like movie. Young, hungry Anthony Hopkins giving a shit about the performance.
I will put it blow to blow with any of his other performances.
It's so good.
It's very.
But we're not gonna
solid. We'll get into it when we talk about the review. The only reason that it's not ranking higher for me is that because it's such a steel trap of a screenplay, you can interpret it as either a horror movie or as a psychological thriller. It really lets you take what you want out of it, which I think is so smart. For me, 20th position is Magic.
I could a tale unfold, whose lightest word would harrow up thy soul, freeze thy young blood.
I am here to investigate the disappearance of a young girl. Where is Rowan Morrison?
If Rowan Morrison existed, we would know.
I suspect murder.
Sergeant, I've already
In the name of God, woman, what kind of mother are you? That can stand by and see your own child slaughtered.
You are the fool, Mr. Harry.
You're liars. You are despicable little liars.
So Wicker Man was released in 1973.
Yo.
I think I mentioned this when we were doing our ranks of the movies when we talked about Wicker Man, but even though it's 1973, I feel a real 60s vibe, this movie.
Yeah.
There's something a little bit stoned about it, a little bit like
the
experimental, edging on funny, but not because of the story that's being told.
The alternate title I had for this was The Wicker Man, or brackets, or How I Stopped Worrying About Paganism and Got It On. Oh yeah.
I'm trying to warn people coming into Wicker Man because it's considered a classic horror movie by a lot of people, and I understand why it's considered a classic horror movie.
Yeah.
But for a good portion of this movie's running time, it really doesn't feel like a horror movie.
This movie would not work today as a movie. I know they tried it in 2006 and they replaced the fear of paganism with the fear of the matriarchy, but...
I don't know if I would say you couldn't remake The Wicker Man successfully or update it, but... whatever changes you'd make would have to be different.
I just think there are certain stories of a time and a place.
Yeah.
You could do a good cult movie, which, this essentially is, but...
I want to prepare anybody who's going to watch The Wicker Man for... It's a bit of a sit, and it's a weird sit.
Yes.
There's songs in it. There's really strange costume choices.
Yeah.
There's really long, pregnant pauses in the film.
Yes.
There's something really self-consciously arty and free love about the movie.
Yes.
I think it's one of these movies that
has the most weirdest opening title track song.
Right. That doesn't feel like a horror movie.
No. Not since Ravenous had I kind of went, what is this score to this movie?
Now, I don't know if all of this is to lull you into a false sense of security so that when the ending snaps, and we will talk about it when we get there, that it really does hit home.
Yeah.
But this is a movie that is, I feel, in a lot of ways, redeemed by its last 15 minutes.
Okay.
It's not that I hate everything that came before it. It's that it confuses me and I don't understand it. And I've talked about
it is so off-kiltered and just off-key.
The tonal shifts really kind of throw me. I sort of believe in picking the type of movie you're making and playing in that court. You know what I mean? And this movie,
The thing, sorry to interrupt, but the thing I sort of thought is, what happened if the director changed his mind and really sort of laid it on melodramatically and gothic and spooky, then we'd know right off the bat that something is amok. So
and it wouldn't be Wicker Man.
Yeah, and that was one thought I kind of had. Well, because I was kind of it did jar me, and like, this isn't not at all playing like a horror movie, and it had me worried. Good thing that it changed, but then I thought about it. Well, if it went the other way, I don't think it would be as powerful, or I think the classic horror film it's called today.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's one of those.
I have to concede that to me it is a flawed movie.
Yeah.
But that the ending does redeem it. Like, it does successfully pull it out in the last act.
Yeah.
The story concerns Edward Woodward, who's known mainly on this side of the ocean from the TV show.
He's a very pious man.
The Equalizer. He's a virgin.
Yeah.
He's a middle-aged, super religious, virginal police officer who's come to, investigate.
Yeah, and boy, does he come to the wrong place.
Well, he's tempted, right?
Tempted.
That's the really interesting thing about this movie. Like, I feel like part of everything we see in its own way is part of the ritual.
Yeah.
Every step of fucking with him is part of the ritual.
Yeah.
Every step of testing him
is part of the ritual. Yeah.
Like, if he succumbed and kicked down the door and had sex with this, seductive. This woman does this crazy naked dance in the room next to him.
Erotic. It's one of the most erotic scenes in film.
And you can see it's ripping him apart. Like, it's testing him to his full limit. Yeah. But he stays strong.
Yeah.
What's interesting to me is that if he had sex with her, I think that he would no longer be a viable candidate.
Well, yeah, that was the one
Wicker
thing.
Man,
yeah,
right?
like,
if
so
he'd actually been able to have sex with that
then
woman,
he would have saved himself.
He'd be no longer this pure, perfect sacrifice. Right?
Yeah.
So they kept on almost trying to corrupt him.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because you think they don't want him to become corrupted.
Yeah.
Because then they have to start all over again.
Yeah, and that ceremony would be null and void, which doesn't make sense. But I mean,
it's very specific.
Part of the ritual, I guess. Yeah.
They lead him down paths, and that's the sort of scary body snatchers angle to the movie. Is nobody in the community doesn't know that this man is never going to leave this community. Yeah. Right? Like, he is winding up the clock on his life, and everybody he sees knows it. Except for him. Yeah. And that's where the horror creeps into this story. Yeah. And they're so polite and nice about what they're doing.
Yeah.
Too,
well,
right?
I mean, wouldn't you? But yeah. Would you like a sausage? I don't know. It's even like Lord Summerside, played by the great Christopher Lee. We should get to him. Yeah. Is like totally tempts him. I think when he visits his house and he sees those people doing that weird naked ceremony, I think he invites him to join or something, and just.
Plenty of casual nudity in this movie.
Yeah. That orgy scene that starts off in the first 15 minutes, after that night when he first arrives on the island and has dinner, it's creepy. It's just like, it's very sexual, but it's also creepy. Like, he walks out of a restaurant and sees a field of people just
going to.
Yep.
Again, it's a real test and a real struggle for this really super pious religious man that he wants to do the right thing and get to the bottom of things here, but it's really, really testing him.
That's one of the things that makes the film horrific, though, and which is why I don't think they can make that film today, because it is there's just a lot of free sexuality. I'm sure they could, but it wouldn't. I don't think it would play in mainstream theaters.
Well, it didn't play in mainstream theaters originally. This is sort of, like I say, one of the first real snowball effect horror releases. And like I say, it was paired with Don't Look Now when it toured the States. Stayed at the time. Yeah. And it found its audience. And people still watch and talk about The Wicker Man today. Yeah. And at the time it came out, it was...
Yep.
It came and went,
Yeah.
I think that's true of a lot of movies that stay with you. Like, for all of its flaws, Wicker Man sticks in your craw. It stays with you. Yeah. Like, so I can't just dismiss it, even though I do have problems with it. Yeah. Christopher Lee, who I've always liked, is interesting. He's probably getting close to middle age when he's doing this movie. But to me, as long as I've been alive, Christopher Lee's been that old guy with the deep voice, right? And
he actually called this one of his favorite movies to make.
He really, really liked that one, and he got paid almost no money for his time on it. Yeah. And I guess he is if there was one sort of poster child for this pagan community,
Yeah.
it's the Christopher Lee character.
Yeah.
So he's simultaneously very warm and very
Yeah.
open and very,
Yeah.
pious in his own way, just
Yes.
in a very different way than
He's very welcoming and articulate, and
the whole time he's setting this guy up for a terrible, terrible death.
yes, and even deals with Edward Woodward's character's insults. Like when they first meet up and have a face to face, it's like, so yeah, you see him as a true gentleman, and lo and behold, that's so not the case.
Things that I do think work as creepy that don't have to do with the very end of the movie
Yeah,
is some of the animal pagan masks that
Yep.
we see them wearing.
yeah,
We start seeing them as the festival's getting closer, they start showing up in the background a little bit here and there.
Yeah.
And as he's being led to the sacrificial mount, pretty much all of the villagers that we see have these weird,
yeah,
expressionless animal rabbit masks and horse masks, and
Yeah.
and apparently this is all very authentic to the pagan rituals. The
Yeah.
Wicker Man itself is an offering that would often be made to keep the fields,
yeah,
the bounty of the fields, guaranteed.
yeah.
But
was that-
there's something about masks that I've always found troubling. I think I'll talk about it similarly effective in magic when we talk about that with the dummy, but how they have no expression and every expression.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very hyper stylized expression that can scare people.
You can just it's like the Strangers movie.
Yeah.
Just the shot of somebody standing in the dark wearing a Halloween mask, and it's not fucking Halloween.
Yeah.
Just, no
Nope.
thank you. There's a lot of no thank you there.
How nature says, do not touch.
Yeah.
What was that Hitman horror movie that came out some years ago, early 2000, like sort of mid 2000s?
Hitman horror movie?
Yeah, those two hitmen that are on that, they've been assigned a whole bunch of series of murders by a cult, we find out by the end.
Yeah, I know, the British one.
Yeah. I think that owed a huge debt to this movie.
Right.
Even the mask looks sort of similar. I saw them both recently and I went, So the Wicker Man's had an effect on a lot of filmmakers and horror filmmakers.
And I think the whole idea of like an ancient cult that somehow managed to either reappear or that has been hidden and still existing.
Yeah.
That's good fodder for horror.
Yes.
Another thing that this reminded me of was the first Last Exorcism movie.
Yeah.
Where an entire community has totally jumped the needle on Christianity.
Yeah.
But somehow managed to keep it on the down low.
Yeah, and it's an idea that's popular even today. I can tell you
It's
that so
relevant
many
today.
kids love the Illuminati to like unhealthy, obsessive ends.
And religious extremism is something we are still dealing with every single day.
Yes.
So, I mean, it's still a relevant movie.
Yeah.
Is there anything you want to talk about before we get to the end of the movie? 'Cause I do think that
No. I really like this movie. What's the name of the actress? The young actress that is actually hired to seduce him. She was also very good.
Diane Silencio.
Yeah, I
played
think
Miss
she-
Rose, and Britt Eklund played Willow. I think Britt Eklund is the chick who did the dance.
Yes, that's her. Yeah, apparently she was kind of a big 70s star for a little bit and then disappeared into the ether somewhat. I think she's actually in The Long Goodbye, to be perfectly honest.
I haven't seen Long Goodbye. There's a documentary on the disc where she talks about how she's not happy. They used half of her for the dance sequence and half of her was a body double.
Yeah.
And she didn't like the extra junk in the trunk that the body double had. It just
Fair
didn't
enough.
feel like it was...
Okay. Alrighty. No, she's really good. I
understand her as a sexual temptation.
Yes.
So the Wicker Man is a huge wooden statue that is filled with, timber,
Animals.
some animals, some of the best fruit and stuff that have been taken from that year's harvest. And this one man, this pious religious Christian,
who's
pure as the
kind of
drip
almost
snow.
insufferable, but he's still very relatable.
He is uncompromising in his faith.
Yeah.
And to them, that's exactly what they're looking for.
Yeah.
A strength in his character that they can exploit for their sacrifice. But
Yeah.
they break his limbs and put him at the top of the Wicker Man and set it at the fire at the bottom.
And the animals as that extra added touch because they're all screaming because they know death is coming.
And while the animals and this man have a slow, terrible, burning death, this crowd joins hands and prances about in a circle, singing these jolly, warm songs, which we have been hearing throughout the movie.
Yeah.
But now in this context, it's just become terrible.
Yeah.
And I have to say, Edward Woodward really delivers in that. Like, when he first sees the Wicker Man and everything falls into place, like, he realizes what's happened, what's happening to him, and what's going to happen to him.
Yeah.
And, it's horrifying. It is fucking horrifying.
Yep.
And as much as we may be frustrated by his character and his lack of compromise, he does not deserve this.
No, he does not. Apparently there's a written novella sequel to this where he actually escapes. It starts with the thing burning and he gets free, which of course would make no sense because his arms and legs are broken.
The entire point of this story is lost if he lives.
Yeah, no, he's dead.
Yeah,
he's dead. He's dead. No, he's even the whole when he's running throughout the city towards the end, from there on, it's pretty terrifying. And then
there's no help for him, and we know it.
Yeah, right? And then he goes to that tunnel, and there's that infamous speech that Summerside gives to him, and that's it. Where at that point he realized that he's been seduced here the entire time, and even that girl who may or may not, it's not his daughter at all.
No. I think it was all a manipulation.
Yeah.
But it's effective again.
Yeah.
Dated but effective.
Yeah. It's brutal. That burning is brutal. It's awful. Like, the animal screaming was the one thing that really got to me. I mean, him screaming is also horrific. But it was just the chorus.
Christ! Christ!
Yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah. But just even the animal screaming, that was just like a clearly sound of hell.
And it echoes back to the burning of witches and like public hangings, where it became like this family thing. Yeah. You'd bring your kids in a picnic lunch to watch the hanging or the burning.
Yeah.
And everybody's on board and totally okay with it. No one questions it, so it doesn't even read as weird to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can't believe, Christopher Lee, when he was making this, he thought he was making a comedy. That's not the first time I've heard that about actors getting on set and thinking that, they're making this melodramatic, either dark comedy. There is a very thin line between humor and horror. It works.
It's pretty weird. There are scenes where when they were shooting it and he was looking at his costume and what was going on, and I can see, this is out there. Yeah. And it is.
Yeah.
It is. But the horror kind of closes its fist on you at the third act.
Yeah.
So I think it's worth fighting through. I mean, some people may like that weird.
No. It's enjoy it all. Yeah. There's a reason for all this sort of weird lunacy. House had that sort of same thing where it started off with this really over the top melodramatic, cutesy story, and not that I think the story here is cutesy, but just the total tonal shift that somehow works.
Somehow. Mr. Beckmann, what was your 19th ranked horror film from the 1970s?
Okay, hold on. Number 19, this is not the first of this writer's stories on this list. I do think this is when Stephen King was really starting to hit his prime, just at storytelling, but I think probably, well, no, maybe not his finest hour, but it's definitely a solid, and originally on the air as a TV miniseries instead of a movie. I mean, when it's released now, they've got it all condensed to 3 and some hours, so it is now a movie. But Salem's Lot, Toby Hooper's, I think, a really solid movie. The only thing that really hurts it is the sort of 70s TV version budget of it, and there's some pretty hammy acting, but
it's great to see a young Fred Willard wearing some of the worst wardrobe you'll ever fucking
interesting
see.
Character too. I know he's different in the book.
there's some classic stuff in that.
Yeah.
I've talked shit about Tobe Hooper, but that neighbor boy tapping on the window, some of those weird smoke scenes and shot and reverse shots, like there's some good stuff in Salem's Lot, and yes, we will be talking about that for me as well at some point. In 19th position for me, I have the directorial debut of Clint Eastwood in Play Misty for Me.
Mm-hmm.
He plays a radio DJ who has a regular female caller who requests that he play Misty for her. Mm-hmm. And they get into a relationship, and she becomes increasingly obsessed with him, and her madness is laid bare. The actress who plays the psycho, whose name's escaping me at the moment, she's the mom in Arrested Development, and she voices Archer's mom in the TV show animated series Archer. Mm-hmm. It's funny, like she's had another sort of career boom in the autumn of her life, which is great. But it's an interesting movie because it puts Clint Eastwood in kind of a more romantic role.
Yep.
It's the first time that you've seen him directing a movie, and he does it really well.
Yeah.
And although the stalker psycho genre was going to get kicked to death by the time we got to the 90s, in 77, I think this was, or something like that.
It's the first one of its ilk, and it's Clint Eastwood's first directorial movie. It almost made my list.
Yeah. There's a scene that's burned in my mind where he gets cut, his hand gets cut with a butcher knife. Yeah. And it's not as graphic as they could show it. We get a reverse angle on it. But I saw it with my dad when I was like 11 years old, and it has never left my thoughts. Yeah. So I had to find a place for it. Another adjacent to this, I won't count it on this, but I thought it was one of these movies that only I was intrigued by, but another Clint Eastwood one. He didn't direct it, but it's called The Beguiled. Yeah, yeah. It's recently been remade by Sofia Coppola.
He directed the original, though.
Did you direct the original? I don't think you did.
Oh,
anyway.
Yeah.
If you haven't seen it, I haven't seen the remake, but I've always had a weird affection for...
that could be also seen as a horror film in its own way.
Yeah, it's so dark and so psychologically twisted that it almost qualifies, but... Play Misty for me is on the list, but if you like Clint Eastwood, definitely check out The Beguiled.
Yeah, see, a lot of people kind of come down hard on Clint Eastwood, but he's a really, really good director, and he's directed a lot of films that a lot of people have not seen. So,
and again, Play Misty was his first movie. It was in the 70s. It's not like he just started making movies in the 90s. Yeah, right? People seem to think that he started with Unforgiven, and he'd been making movies for well over 10 years.
No, you're right. Don Siegel directed The Beguiled.
There you go.
Yeah. Anyways, no, I hear you. All right.
So in 18th place.
In 18th place, I have another Italian horror film that's not a giallo, but it's also creepy, and one that, time has been kind to it. Once again, the idea behind it is utterly chilling. And I also think that Stephen King might have borrowed quite heavily when he wrote Chill in the Corn a couple of years later, but that is... And there's two names for it. Here it's called Who Can Kill a Child. Yeah. The other one, it's Island of the Damned. It's also been released as. Right. The idea, if you can get past the pretentious, opening credits, which are about 10 minutes, explaining all these different wars, and we're supposed to leave like the reasons why the kids, start killing adults is because they've been slaughtered through all these adult wars, if you will. There's something else more supernatural going on with the kids, that almost like a virus that infects them.
Zombie-ish, yeah.
Yeah. But the scenes where you could see both the mother and the father, breaking down to the idea that they're going to have to murder these children if they are to survive. It also has a horrific moment, and they'd been sort of broadcasting it, like subtly more and more as the story goes along, that the mother's pregnant, very pregnant during this time, this island, and of course,
for the stakes.
Yeah, and what eventually does kill her is the child inside of her, right, as the father watches it. Like, it's just, there's so many horrific ideas that are put out.
I have seen that one, and I find like that's intriguing in concept, but less so in execution. It might be benefit of being first and have that infamous reputation. There's a Christmas-themed movie called The Children,
which is very terrifying.
Is quite terrifying and treads the same material in a much more salient way, I think. But give it points for being out there and first. So. Yeah. I understand why it's on your list. It didn't come near to mine.
I just thought it was just horrifying. Anyways, yeah.
Number 18 for me, you've already talked about it. It's Phantasm. Yeah. It's interesting to me is that's a movie when I first saw it I wasn't that big on. Yeah. But for some reason it sticks with me. So then I borrowed it from the library a couple times, watched it again. Yeah. I reviewed it with Jeremy for the podcast, and we both spoke fairly favorably of it. Yeah. And like it's this really sort of scrappy
It's
Like,
made with love. I'll
it's
say.
scrappy independent horror the way it should be. The fact that it's so crazy and the fact that it barely holds together is in a way part of its charm.
Yeah.
You've never seen this story told before.
No.
And you can tell that it's been made with zero money, but so much love.
Yeah.
So it's almost a movie that's impossible to hate.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to say whether or not it lives up to its reputation, but I will argue that it gets better for me with each viewing.
Yeah,
So
I
that's
agree.
something.
The more I see it, the more I love it.
Yeah. So it fought its way to 18. Phantasm.
Yep. Number 17. You have already mentioned this movie as well. Richard Matheson is such a great storyteller, and this is, of course, also a very young, talented Steven Spielberg.
Right.
Really knocking it out of the park. I've actually had nothing as dramatic as what goes on in this story, and apparently this is his last written screenplay before he,
Well, he wrote the screenplay for Poltergeist.
Did he really?
Yeah.
Because he sort of claims, at least what I saw, that, well, I guess I got my facts wrong. There you go.
Well, maybe he had been sitting on Poltergeist for a while. Who
Maybe.
knows?
Anyways, I don't know. But he talks about Duel, and I've experienced rage incidents as well, so I can identify with some of the things. Not as dramatic as played out here.
Right.
And it's such a simple story.
Yeah,
but
I guess I didn't mention it. This dude is being utterly
Hunted.
terrorized and hunted by this semi-truck that appears to have no driver.
Yeah. We know he's got boots and feet and everything, and we see this sort of side profile a little bit.
But we don't get any access to the driver.
Yeah. No, and that's Duel.
Yeah.
Anyways, I never did say the name. Steven Spielberg's Duel. It's a great, like 109 minutes or something. Not even. I think it's 90 something.
Right.
And it's tight. And I love the music is more sound than it is, sort of melodic music, whatever.
Well, and it definitely shows up Spielberg as the director out of the gate, because this is storytelling through cinema. There's not a ton of dialogue. It is usually a one-on-one confrontation with two people who cannot communicate with each other. It's action heavy, but and again, Spielberg is hard. He's fairly consistent. Even the bad movies he makes are well-made bad movies. For me, at 17th place, we're getting into some classic exploitation territory here, but I had to make room for Dante's Piranha.
Yay! Piranha ranks higher for me.
I mean, I talked about it in the Wally Water.
I'm almost kind of disappointed that it's this low for you.
Low? Yeah. Well, I mean, its entire existence is predicated on course of Jaws, and half the reasons people came to got in the seats was, cheesy violence and titty, and the movie delivers that in as fun a package as you could imagine, And again, scrappy, no budget, no frills. The piranhas don't even look that great, but I still think this is a deeply enjoyable film. So 17th position for Piranha.
Okay. Number 16, I have Richard Attenborough's Magic. Both the novel and he did the screenplay by William Goldman. I will argue, and I don't want to talk too much about this because we're going to talk about it at greater length. I think it's a more tragic story than it is scary.
Right.
And it's the performance out of Anthony Hopkins and even like Anne Margaret, I gotta give her kudos too, are so good. But,
we'll talk about the review.
But the one who really does it for me is Burgess Meredith. Anyways,
it's a good show.
Yeah.
I have a suspicion that you're going to admonish me for having it this low on the list.
Okay.
It's 16th. I have David Cronenberg's The Brood.
Okay.
We're going to, again, this is another one that we're going to review, but it has to do with experimental science and psychiatry and the parent-child dynamic, let us say, and the fear that we have that we're destroying our children and the psychological and physical damage that can occur. Also, there's monstrous dwarf children. So we'll talk about it. I mean, it has all of the hallmarks of the early Cronenberg and it being very rough around the edges in a lot of ways. But a lot of people will give Scanners the Thing as the movie that put Cronenberg on the map. And I'm going to go on record as saying, for me, it's The Brood.
Yeah, The Brood is awesome. All right, number 15. I love this movie. I think it's such a beautiful movie to look at. It's Baroque imagery in this movie. The school itself is just gorgeous to look at, and the soundtrack by Goblin is so loud. Like, you should watch this movie, with the volume turned up. I think the sound really helps this movie. But that is Dario Argento's Suspiria. That opening kill is just one of the most scariest kills in any horror film for me. I don't know what it is. It's when the eyes open up. And you can even see in the background, there's that shot that he's got, of the towels flapping. And it's coming from there. But when it shows up, I don't know, just with that Goblin soundtrack and Watch Her Murdered that way. I would love to talk about this movie at some point.
Okay.
So that's
Suspiria. It will get its proper day in court. I have a tie.
Okay.
In 15th place.
Okay.
The reason they're ties is they're movies made by big directors that maybe aren't according to Hoyle horror movies. One of them you've mentioned is The Deliverance.
Yes.
The other one is Straw Dogs.
Sam Peckinpah.
Sam Peckinpah.
That's an ugly movie.
Yeah.
That was also bouncing in between my list, but didn't make it.
Because basically it's a back-heavy movie. Like, all of the violence happens in basically the last 20 minutes of the film.
Yeah.
But it's a slow car accident. You see this coming.
Yeah.
You see this coming. You see shit getting worse.
Yeah.
There's a really uncomfortable sort of pseudo-rapey scene between... Well, is it or is it not a rape? Is sort of the controversy of the scene. She's into it until the point that she's not, but at that point it seems to have gone. Anyway, it's really uncomfortable stuff, and it's really interesting seeing Dustin Hoffman go from this meek, bureaucratic-looking fellow into this full-on fucking warrior who's protecting his home by any means necessary, and how you're cheering for him, but you're still feeling mixed about this violence that you're seeing. And Deliverance, you already talked about this utter undoing of sort of masculine energy. This group of boys that are going out the woods to, kick nature's ass and encounter some hill folk. I mean, Deliverance, I think, basically invented that idea of crazy, rapey hill folk. Like, it's a ridiculous sort of conceit.
Is
but
it though, Larry?
People believe it, and they believe it because of Deliverance. And, I mean, the fear of being raped is very real. And for women, for sure, but this kind of made it real for men, too. It's a powerful movie. It's hard to deny it. And, again, the vengeance that gets eked out in the movie, you're cheering for them, but it's also horrible. So,
it is an ugly, ugly movie if you've not seen it.
So
folks.
Deliverance and Straw Dogs share 15, and I understand that people might be yelling at the computers right now saying that they're not horror movies, but I suggest you take a hard look at them.
Yep.
So there they are.
Okay, we're at 14, are we?
Yep.
At 14, we have, I think, probably, and we'll talk about this more, but this is probably Brian De Palma's most emotionally intelligent screenplay out of his movies. There's a lot of great characters and acting, and it's a short movie. And that's, Brian De Palma's Carrie, the adaptation of Stephen King's really, really good novel.
Well, for the first time, I will say you have a item way too low on your list, but go ahead.
Okay. But I have Carrie.
Yeah, that's another one we're going to review.
Yeah.
I also am biased because I love Stephen King.
Yeah.
But I think Carrie is a very important horror movie.
Yes.
And yes, we will talk about it.
Okay.
Here's a movie that you may think ranks too low.
Yeah.
In 14th place, I'm putting The Omen.
It's not on my list.
Oh, really?
Not on my list.
Yes, The Omen borrows heavily from The Exorcist.
Yeah.
Yes, it does. But it has a lot of these crazy elaborate kills. It's almost this like supernatural slasher movie.
Yeah.
In a way, I was thinking, I guess because I watched it recently, at Final Destination, there's a scene where a character gets beheaded by a sheet of glass, and it almost feels like he's been faded. There's the classic scene where the nanny hangs herself in front of a
creepy scene.
birthday party
agree.
full of kids.
Yeah.
It's got a mainstay classic Hollywood star in it, but it does not give you the ending that you want or expect.
Yeah.
So I understand why The Omen is respected. I put it in the middle of the list. I don't think it's like the greatest of the 70s, but I think it's in the conversation.
I like it. I mean, I do like it. I don't find it overly scary. I guess even as a kid, when I saw it for the first time, I could see the ending coming a mile away. I knew that no good was going to come from this ending for our heroes. I've never found The Omen overly scary. I found it entertaining. There's some things that are very, very dated and not done well even for the 70s, like the death of the reporter in the graveyard It's a famous kill, basically, where
where he's supposed to be
David Warner, I think is the actor's name.
Yeah.
David
Warner's the guy that gets beheaded. It's the priest.
Right, it's beheading that.
It's the priest that gets speared through.
But David Warner's death I found always cheesy.
Right.
And then the spear I found also kind of cheesy. Anyways.
I think it deserves its place in the conversation.
Yeah.
The movie adjacent to this that doesn't quite make the list, but I think is worth the conversation, is a TV movie called The Other.
Okay.
Where this little boy keeps on playing with his twin, even though his twin is dead.
Right.
And there's a really, really awful twist to it. And it was a movie that aired regularly on TV and traumatized a lot of kids.
Yeah.
So if you're into creepy little kids, The Omen and The Other, definitely stalwarts of the 70s.
Okay. Okay, at number 13, when you first mentioned about doing this list, and you mentioned that's one of the films we're going to review, I didn't hesitate for a second because it's not in some ways conventional horror movie, but it is also very terrifying. And you are seeing the birth of a psychopath.
Yeah.
This was, I think, a true original film. It's probably one of the greatest American films ever made. Quentin Tarantino, I think, calls it, the best first-person narrative character piece movie, the best of. And although I might argue with that a little bit, it's definitely one of the best.
Yeah.
And that is Martin Scorsese's, based on Paul Schrader's terrifying script, Taxi Driver.
Yeah. No, you're not going to hear me fighting that. We're pretty close on that, where it ranks on the list. But, yeah. Yes, to all of that.
Yeah.
I like Mean Streets was also a very stylistic movie and very personal. Scorsese wrote Mean Streets himself about people he knew growing up. But Taxi Driver, for me, is when Scorsese fully arrives as a filmmaker and a storyteller and a visual artist. Like, he's one of my favorite filmmakers, and Taxi Driver is a big part of that. I think Goodfellas is maybe a bigger part of that, but Taxi Driver is important.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no.
We'll talk more about it. Yeah.
This one again, number 13 for me. It slowly creeps up the list because when I first saw it, honestly, I wasn't a big fan of it. I thought that it was kind of a mediocre movie that was saved by a really, really tough ending. But The Wicker Man grows on me.
Yeah.
Yes, there's some absurdity to it, and yes, it's a 70s movie that almost feels 60s.
Yeah.
It's got like that Avengers absurdity to it, or that Prisoner type of vibe to it, where like the costumes are a little much, the presentations are a little much. There's actually a couple of songs, like full-on songs in the movie. Yeah,
the opening track is just bizarre. Like it I don't know whether it's jolting you to say how different this movie's going to be or what.
It's almost daring you to keep watching.
I know.
In some ways, it's like what it is. But when you get to the base story that's being told here and the manipulation of our main character, it does become this horrifying, reminiscent of Shirley Jackson's The Lottery type of thing, but taken to an absurd extreme. I get why people don't like the movie.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that if the ending's wrecked for you, the movie's kind of wrecked for you.
Yeah.
So we are going to talk about the ending when we review the film. I won't talk about it here, but this is a warning, to anyone
Spoilers,
listening.
if you've not seen this movie,
if you haven't seen The
should
Wicker
watch
Man, you should watch it before you listen to our review because... the third act is the big save of the movie.
Yeah.
But I do think the movie is interesting, and I do think the movie is surprisingly creepy. And again, 10 years ago, it might not have been on the list, and 5 years ago, it might have been at the bottom of the list. And here it's halfway up the list.
Yeah.
So, Wicker Man is just a little engine that could for me.
Yeah.
So, number 13, Wicker Man.
The taxi driver is looking for a target. Getting ready. Getting organized. Preparing himself for the only moment in his life that will ever mean anything.
How much for everything? $350 for the Magnum, $250 for the 38, $1.25 for the 25, $150 for the 380.
That taxi driver's been staring at us.
You talking to me? You talking to me?
I don't know who's weirder, you or me.
You talking to me? Well, then who the hell else are you talking? Talking to me? Well, I'm the only one here.
I don't believe I've ever met anyone quite like you.
Oh, yeah?
You will never see a more chilling performance than this. Robert De Niro and Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver. Jodie Foster, Albert Brooks, Harvey Keitel, Leonard Harris, Peter Boyle, Sybil Shepherd. Taxi Driver.
So, I'm out of the closet as far as my position on Martin Scorsese. Okay,
I think a lot of people
I'm a fan.
A lot of people are out of the closet with that. Yeah, that does not need any explanation.
That said, I mean, like, he's not flawless. He's made films that are, imperfect. But like with a lot of my favorite directors, I will watch his worst film and be happy with it. Like, there'll be something in it that will make it worth my time. Yes, as I believe I said before, Taxi Driver is the movie that made Scorsese. Mean Streets definitely got him noticed, but Taxi Driver made him a filmmaker.
It won him the Palme d'Or.
Yeah, like it made him 100% legit. And I completely understand it. It's centers around a Vietnam veteran played by Robert De Niro named Travis Bickle, who spends his nights driving a cab in New York and seeing every type of depravity possible. Now, he's broken.
Actively seeks it.
He's broken when we meet him, but we see him go from broken to, like, dangerous.
Well, I think at least a psychopath, very much a serial killer.
Yeah. So there's the world that he sees, and then there's the world that exists in his head. And then there's the real grimy sort of New York, and all of which we're granted sort of access to. But the stylization, the narration, the absolutely full-blooded performance from De Niro. He was really good in Mean Streets too, but you get the feeling like he dug the fuck in for Travis Bickle, right? There was nothing.
Well, he was given a gift.
Yeah, there was nothing he was unwilling to do for the part. He actually drove a cab to research it, and made great steps to make himself comfortable to Jodie Foster without ingratiating himself to her.
Yeah.
Apparently, Jodie Foster tells stories that they would hang out, but he wouldn't talk to her. He would just basically be in the room with her. He'd take her to a diner, let her eat whatever she want, let her drink whatever she want, but he wouldn't talk to her.
Okay.
And basically, she got used to being around him. Because she was a very, very young actress when she was 12 and 13, I think, over the course of the production. So
she actually had a psychology test done before they agreed to use her.
She's playing a prostitute, and she's got some pretty frank dialogue about
Don't you want to make it? Yeah.
And I think that she does give a really strong performance. I mean, it's all about De Niro if you're talking about acting in this movie, and I respect that, but I also like... It's an interesting supporting cast. I like Albert Brooks playing a normal dude.
Everyone's really good. I even like Sybil Shepherd as Betsy.
Yeah, and I'm not usually a huge Sybil Shepherd fan, but it's funny because that's where we get into sort of King of Comedy kind of humor when he tries to take this woman out on a date and takes her to a porn movie, right?
Yeah. You know who's really good in this movie?
Peter Boyle?
Well, Peter Boyle's really good. He's part of one of my favorite scenes in this movie. But, you've been sort of like, picking away at Quentin Tarantino for, directors that insert themselves in movies.
Nope.
The scene, Scorsese is in the film visibly twice.
Yeah.
He's actually in it 3 times apparently, but visibly it's him. The scene he has with De Niro where he is this broken, jaded, possibly homicidal man who's upset because his wife is, quote unquote, never mind. I'm not going to finish that sentence, actually.
Yeah,
but he's upset about the relations that a black man is having.
And he has no one to talk to about it except for this cab driver.
Yeah.
The interesting thing I like about that scene is that it's actually all Scorsese.
Yeah.
It's one of the few scenes of the movie that doesn't completely depend on De Niro. De Niro doesn't say anything to him. He just sits there and looks at him through the rearview mirror.
In a sort of shock, but almost agreeing type face.
Well, he would be a hypocrite to call bullshit on this guy. Right?
But it's a really, really powerful scene.
I get what you're saying, though, because a lot of the times when an actor puts themselves in a movie, it's kind of, or a director puts themselves in the movie, it's distracting.
Yeah.
Apparently, it wasn't planned to be that day, but the actor that they'd originally hired didn't show up, or there was some last minute thing. Yeah. And Scorsese had done some work. He has, if you can look him up on IMDb, he shows up in small, usually one scene roles in movies. he's not inexperienced.
Yeah.
And unlike Tarantino, it didn't take me out of the movie.
Yeah.
I think if you didn't know what Martin Scorsese looked like, that scene might just drift by and you wouldn't clock it as anything special, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, he's fine in the scene, but like the thing that makes it stand out is if you know that's Martin Scorsese,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But Quentin Tarantino will always, he'll try out a really bad, Australian accent or, somehow draw attention to himself. And
Yeah, I want to talk about the aesthetic of this movie because when you first mentioned this with the top 70 horror films of all time, you said it pretty early in the conversation, and without hesitation, I said I totally agree.
Yeah.
This movie, Martin Scorsese even once said that his movies, most movies are extensions of the author's dreams, if you will, and if that's the case, then Taxi Driver is very much a nightmare. With that opening shot of smoke, with that taxi breaking through that grime and smoke, and that crescendoing sound of the snare drum and the horns, put together masterfully by Bernard Herrmann. It is dark and creepy and scary, and then that taxi just sort of breaks on through, and it's this very hypnotic, nightmarish pace and mood.
Yeah.
It's right off the bat, it's telling you like this is not a safe place.
Yeah. This is new. Something special is arriving to you with Taxi Driver.
But no, if you stop me think about it, like this is very much a nightmare. More Paul Schrader's than I think Scorsese's, obviously.
I think Scorsese brought it to life. I'm kind of glad that Schrader didn't direct it in a way.
Yeah.
Like I'm glad that it was Scorsese's hand.
Yeah.
Present on it. And I do think that the casting, going back to that, is spot on. Albert Brooks was mainly known as a stand-up comedian at the time.
Yeah.
And he's a funny-ish character, but not like ha-ha funny. He's not comic relief. Yeah. He's just a normal guy flirting around at the office and dealing with this Travis Bickle character who is way more dangerous than he realizes.
Yes.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
And I really like that performance. Sybil Shepherd, I know typically she's left me cold. She's just one of these smiley actresses who smiles her way through the role, right? And I really like the dance that she has. Like, I don't know why she's initially charmed by Bickle or maybe pities Bickle, but that date that they go on is one of the most excruciating,
the whole
comedy
thing is
things.
uncomfortable.
It's just brutal.
Yeah, like even that, and then even like the point where he leads up to he comes back into the office and just berates her.
Yeah,
like it's all of that is just uncomfortable to watch. Even more so when he first hits on that lady at the porno theater. Like it's just the second you see him trying, him going, you're like, no,
this ain't gonna fly, dude.
This man's instincts are all wrong.
He's socially just brutal, right? He just doesn't understand the world. Part of it is that he's mentally ill. Part of it is that he's a veteran, but like the world doesn't make sense to him. He sees it as this sleazy cesspool, and he wants to
thinks in very simplistic terms. I think.
And he wants to be a hero in it, and that's where the Jodie Foster character comes in. He sees this child selling herself on the street.
Well, Travis has this very Madonna horror complex thing going on, which is one of the things that's very terrifying because, I don't know, I find a lot of men have this kind of thought, especially in their sort of beginning earnings to sort of understand women in more, a sort of sexual sense in that regard. Men have this sort of, I've noticed, maybe I'm wrong, but there's this, and Freud talks about this, that whole Madonna horror complex where they need to save women.
And then fuck them?
Well, kind of, yeah. This whole, at first I'm attracted to the Madonna, if you will. And she is pure. And Travis sees...
I'm attracted to her innocence, but I want to take that innocence
away, yes. Okay. And he even sees Betsy, the first time we see her, we got that sort of, angelic saxophone that, once again, I'm going back to Herman here. And the first thing he describes her as is, the city, they can't touch her. Right. There's that whole shot. And Scorsese's in that shot, actually. And Travis sees this woman on this plateau. And I think we've all done that as at least heterosexual men. Is where she's perfect. And of course...
But it's clearly unhealthy. Like,
yes.
He's, like, in his 30s, and she's, like, 14.
No, I'm talking about Betsy.
Oh, Betsy, sorry.
Yeah,
right.
But when that crashes... He then goes to the sort of extreme opposite. He needs to save Iris, who is, I think, 13, 14?
Yeah.
The character,
at
least. And this obsession to save her, that's basically that's that whole psychology of Madonna and the Whore. Sorry, that word. Anyways.
Yeah. It was interesting watching this documentary on it. They were talking to Albert Brooks, and he was talking to Paul Schrader. And Schrader said, I'm sorry, man, I felt like I dealt you a crappy hand. Like, I didn't feel like I knew you. I didn't know your character, but you're doing a good job of making him full. And Albert Brooks said how strange it was that Paul Schrader had no problem getting inside the head of Travis Bickle. Right? That's not a problem. But some dude who works in a law office or
well, Schrader, I doing like what Homework I did on this talks about, you know, the process of writing this. He did this with a gun under his pillow. He talked about that. Yeah, but he talked about when he first got divorced from his first wife, he was a broke artist who literally went to New York and had no place to sleep. So sometimes would, you know, pay to go into a porno theater and eventually, you know, fall asleep. Like, he really had this journey.
Near madness.
Yeah. I mean, he was also doing Dostoevsky's novel, which name currently escapes me. Right. Tales from the Underground, or Stories from the Underground. Anyways. But yeah, he talks about how, you know, he got insomnia and he would actively go out, and misery loves company sort of mentality.
Right.
But would see himself literally slipping, and he wasn't communicating with a lot of people, and just that sort of weird, pessimistic, dark cycle that just started to circle in his brain. I think that's one thing.
It didn't go as far for him as
and that's when he said that you talked about that moment. That's when I needed to start writing the script and writing this story. That's what he claimed saved him. That thought.
Well, I think one of the more disturbing things about the movie, obviously, there's a climactic shootout where he quote rescues Jodie Foster from Harvey Keitel's pimp and all of the people who are there either as employees or as customers of this brothel.
Yeah.
And in true to Scorsese form, we are treated to a very bloody, very grisly, fairly realistically rendered for the time shootout.
Yeah.
And Travis takes several hits, and Jodie Foster is not grateful. She's horrified.
And what's a horrifying thing that happens?
Yeah. I always remember that scene where she screams, "Don't shoot him, don't shoot him," and he shoots him. It's just like...
And
the violence is...
They had to actually taint the violence. Like, they had to bring the brightness down.
Yeah. But that last scene where of the shootout, where he's sitting on the couch and he brings his bloody hand to his face and he starts pulling this imaginary trigger and pretending to shoot himself in the head.
Yeah.
Is he suicidal at that point? What is that gesture about?
No, he's cracked.
Yeah, like he's just waiting for the police to show up. And I think this is where the final real hit lands. And again, thank you, Paul Schrader. It's, in a way, I think a similar ending that was going for in American Psycho, but way more successful.
Okay.
I've always had a problem with the third act of American Psycho.
Okay.
But yeah, in this case, not only is he not punished for this act, he is rewarded for it in many ways. He is a hero.
Yeah.
Like, what he's done is like this.
And he could have been the polar opposite, 10 hours earlier if he was successful with his original mission, and that's to take out a presidential candidate.
Yeah. It could have gone either way. It just happened by complete chance to go this way. Yeah. And I don't think that vigilante shootout was anything heroic at all.
No,
like, that was fucked up.
He clearly went out to go and hunt these men and slaughter them.
Whatever was going to happen, be it a political assassination or shooting up this brothel, he was going to fucking kill some people. Like, that was the essential ingredient. Death.
Yeah.
And that's where we're left with. He is released. He's a little bit of like a local folk hero for his vigilante work. Yeah. And he goes back to driving a cab, and you could hail that cab, and Travis Bickle could, be there.
Yeah. One thing that always struck me very odd about the movie is that one of the films that heavily influenced, or is heavily influenced and even addressed Taxi Driver, is the film The Searchers by John Ford. Scorsese and both Schrader have admitted to that, and he explains that's why there's that costume change, both for De Niro and Keitel's character, where, you know, when Keitel is eventually killed, he's got that headband.
Yeah, cowboy and Indian thing.
Yeah, and of course Travis has the mohawk and has been dressing like a cowboy even earlier in the film.
And in The Searchers, by the time they, quote, rescue the girl from the natives, she's quote, gone native. She's one of them.
Yeah. But the fact that Travis is very much the villain of the piece and is very much a racist. Like,
oh, absolutely.
Like
we shouldn't soft shoe that. He's not like black people.
He doesn't like almost anyone.
Well, that's the thing. He needs something to focus his rage at. He needs something to kill.
Yeah, it's always
anything different. Like the race thing makes it easy, right?
Yeah. So it was always sort of interesting to me that eventually, when he does make good on his homicidal impulses, is that he kills really Italian or just clearly white people. I mean, all awful.
Yeah, he kills bad people, but that doesn't make him a good person.
No, not at all. Especially since
I do not subscribe to this Dexter school of thought, whereas if you're killing bad people, then you're not so bad.
And in fact, he was already a murderer at that point, because he does kill that black robber.
Yeah.
So no. That's something that struck me very odd with the choices. I know that the John Wayne character and Bickle character are very similar. Like they live in isolation, deeply racist, and
uncompromising.
Yeah,
and driven to violence.
Yeah. So that was always sort of interesting about it.
He doesn't need an excuse, but like he'll make one. But if he decides that you're the guy that's going to be the business end of his violence, he will invent a reason, and it will be completely justified, and you are fucked.
Yeah,
you're not going to talk him out of it,
and
you're certainly not going to outfight this dude.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. No. One thing I want to mention, at least I want to talk about as well, is of course the infamous scene of Taxi Driver. There are many, but if you want to look at classic cinema acting 101. The infamous scene, are you talking to me scene?
Not in the script.
Yeah. It was improvised by De Niro. There's something so authentic and raw and relatable.
You see that want for violence, right?
I can admit I've had conversations like that. Maybe not like, are you talking to me? But even in my youth, you have these conversations in your head where your ego has been trampled on. And like clearly at this point, Travis's ego has been trampled on.
Yeah.
And he's doing this sort of male rage in the dark.
I spent a lot of years being bullied as a young kid. And I totally had those dark fantasies in my head of the perfect thing to say or the perfect violent act to do as retribution.
Yeah.
I never really acted on them, or if I did, it was just made things worse.
Yeah.
But he lives for that. He seeks out that violence.
Yeah.
It's not even an act of vengeance.
Oh no,
like,
he like I said, I'm convinced he actively seeks out the misery. Mm-hmm. That's part of the tragedy of that character. Is he can't see a way out of his slide, even though it's really up to him and the decisions he makes.
And this is an era where things like post-traumatic stress is not a thing. We understand that these guys are coming back damaged, but it's not a diagnosed thing. It's just like, the war fucked you up. A few years of war will do that, but a few years in the real world will fix you right back up.
Yeah.
Actually, not at all.
This is very much a meditation on loneliness. And I know I've been lonely in my life. I don't know. I can't speak for you, obviously, but would I be lying to say that you've had,
Of course.
Yeah. There's something very raw and authentic about it. And I think this is another element that makes this movie very terrifying, is that I do think there's a little bit of Travis Bickle in us all. Am I wrong for that, making that statement? There's conversation that Travis has had that he goes, oh, I've had that thought. And I think the fact that he goes to that end of being a murderer, but you've been somehow drawn into this first person character study, and there's certain elements that ring true to you, but you didn't go that way. And I think that's when you realize that Travis is a very scary, dangerous individual.
Well, that's
it was just the wrong
That's
decision.
what makes the movie memorable to people, because we have those moments.
Yeah.
Someone cuts in line at the coffee shop. I'm like, you fucker, right?
Yeah.
It's not really worth me imagining beating this guy up, but I get unreasonably irritated by that. A car blurs past my house, just going recklessly fast. I'm like, children live here, you motherfucker, right?
Yeah.
I would really like to slap some sense into you. I won't.
Yeah.
But I have that moment in me where that fire just flares up for a second and says, fuck you. But Travis Bickle lives there. That's just where he's constantly on simmer.
Yeah. which makes, I think, one of my favorite scenes in that movie, even more so tragic, is when Travis starts to realize he is going over the edge. And he's trying desperately to sort of at least fight back that slide.
And he has that conversation
with Wizard, the great Peter Boyle. Like, that scene is so heartbreaking.
Because Peter Boyle sees that this guy's struggling, and he's the one person in this world who at least attempts to throw him a fucking lifeline. Attempts to talk reason to him. But I think the argument could be made that he is way too far gone at that point. Like... He needs to be institutionalized.
Quite possibly, but you just kind of hope that if it was... what he offers is so rudimentary and so childish. Just go get it laid, you know, and don't think about it too much. I mean, you can see that Wizard is struggling, and you can clearly see that this man
is... He's not a shrink.
Yeah.
He's just a dude.
Yeah.
That's what. Same thing with the Albert Brooks character. I really like about him. They're just normal people.
Yeah. And the fact that he just can't even say the right things, it's not his fault, and who knows, maybe he couldn't have talked him out of it. But I would like to think that the Wizard character, I had this sort of envision in my head that, you know, if it had gone the other way, that the Wizard character said, hey, why don't we go out for a beer? And I just listen.
Yeah.
If those words were said, who knows? But I mean,
I really like Peter Boyle. He's a really strong dramatic actor, but for somehow reason, ever since Young Frankenstein, he's been ruined to me.
Oh, he's probably
putting on the Ritz. But
well, I'm sure
I love.
You know what? I'm sure Peter Boyle's doing just
fine. Oh no, he's fine. He's absolutely fine. Yeah. But I like seeing him in a dramatic role. Yeah. I know he's not a comedic actor, but I've always sort of thought of him. I've always sort of thought of him as a comedic actor.
Well, he's been in some good movies.
Yeah,
classic movies,
and he hits it right out of the park.
Yeah.
He does exactly what the movie needs him to do.
Yeah.
And if he was maybe a more educated guy or smarter guy, he'd know to say, "Look, come spill your guts to me, or do whatever you need to do." Yeah. Or he would drive him to that hospital. But he's just a guy who says, "Dude, you need to stop worrying about this stuff so much.
Yeah.
You need to relax and get out of your head.
Yeah.
Get laid. Get you know, just shake this shit off." And it's not as easy as that. But he doesn't know that. He's just a nice guy, earnestly being nice.
Yeah.
And Travis Bickle does not know what to do with that.
I know. But you can see him struggling. Like, it's just that pain on his face. He even says, like, even when he's confessing, you know, like, I feel like I want to do bad things. I even think he says, but I know it's wrong. Yeah. There's something so heartbreaking about that. And that, to me, is oddly relatable when you sort of realize, you know, you're going down a path that you know is wrong.
The math always ends in violence, right? I don't like black people, so violence. That woman rejected me, so violence.
I know.
That guy's a competition to me, violence.
Yeah.
I need to rescue this prostitute, violence. All avenues lead to violence, and that's what's scaring him. Yeah. He sees it. No matter what it is, it's going to be someone facing his wrath.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's terrifying. I don't know.
And that's why I think it qualifies as a horror movie.
Yeah. Oh, no.
We're about 22 minutes in. Is there anything else you want to say? Like,
we could talk all day about this.
I know. But we should probably try and put some fences around this.
Wrap it on up. Do my final thesis. Look, this is a classic movie. I think any person who even sees films casually should see this film. Not even for the reasons that we've talked about here. It is truly an original piece, and even though I take homage with Tarantino's, this is probably the best first-person character study narrative. I mean, I can think of a couple others that might rival it. It is still such a unique film, given probably one of the best scary characters ever put to celluloid in Travis Bickle. Amazingly realized by De Niro, but like just the story that Schrader wrote, from the lines to, you know, the structure, how it just comes out. It's just one of the best scripts, and rightfully won the Palme d'Or, best director and best picture. So,
and, you know, crystallized that thing of the De Niro Scorsese dynamic being something to get excited about.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful movie to both to look and listen to, both with the cinematography and the style of editing. Like, Scorsese is really coming into his own.
That's what I really like about it too. It walks this really razor tight line. It's like it is undeniably a 70s movie.
Yeah,
but it's aged really well.
It's also very dreamlike, which continues this sort of theme that a lot of these horror movies have, this sort of, once again, living in this dreamlike quality state. That aesthetic is very prevalent in a lot of these movies, and it's prevalent here. It is very hypnotic, and it goes in like quick jolts and then slows down again.
Visual depth, psychological depth, and not a bad performance to be found.
Yep.
obviously we're not done yet. We still have 12 more ranks to do, their top 12 horror movies of the 70s, and in our next episode we'll be discussing the films Magic, The Brood, and Carrie. How's this all going to work out? What are Lee and Larry going to say is the best horror movie of 1970s? You'll have to tune in next episode to find out. If you want to send me feedback now, do that at ranknreview@gmail.com. Please seek out the show on iTunes, on Facebook. Tell the other movie friend in your life to listen to Rank and Review. As always, this is your host and random Canadian Larry Parsons saying thank you so much for listening.